This happened in 2020, not long after lockdown started easing. My best friend Nate and I had been stuck in our apartments for months, so when restrictions lifted, we decided to go camping out west, somewhere far from people. Nate had moved to Colorado a few years earlier for work, and I was finishing my master's in sociology at the University of Washington. Yes, I know what you're thinking, but it's actually a useful degree. The plan was simple. I'd fly out, borrow his old truck, and we'd spend a few days camping in the San Juan Mountains. It wasn't some grand wilderness expedition. Nate wasn't a hardcore outdoors guy. He worked in IT, lived off energy drinks, and owned exactly one flannel shirt, but he liked quiet spots with good views, and I just needed to get out of the city. I'd been glued to my laptop for months writing about crime arrest trends and anxiety statistics, and I was starting to forget what silence sounded like. We packed light, a 2-man tent, a cooler, and a Bluetooth speaker that cut out every 10 minutes. His dog, Cooper, came too. A wiry border collie that seemed smarter than either of us. We left early, taking a rough service road off Highway 550 that wound through pine forests and into higher country. By the time we found a flat clearing near a ridge, it was already late afternoon. The air was thin and crisp, the kind that burns your lungs a bit when you first step out. There wasn't another soul around. No cars, no ranger signs, not even old fire pits. Nate said that was a good omen, which was funny because he's the least superstitious person I know. I just nodded and started setting up camp. That first evening was perfect. We had cheap beer, cooked sausages, and played cards by the fire. I remember feeling lighter than I had in months. We talked about everything. Work, relationships, dumb plans for a road trip we'd probably never do. At one point, Nate asked if I missed city life, and I said I did, but only the noise. I didn't realize how true that was until later. It was around midnight when we first heard it. A slow, rhythmic thudding from somewhere up the ridge. Faint at first, like someone hammering something far away. I thought maybe it was an echo or wind, knocking loose branches. But it didn't sound random. It came in perfect intervals. Thud, 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 over and over. Nate said it was probably an elk kicking something loose, or maybe a woodpecker, but it was too deep, too heavy for either. Cooper's ears perked up, and he let out a low growl. We shone our torches toward the ridge, but the light didn't reach that far. The sound stopped the instant we did. We sat there for another few minutes, waiting for it to start again. It didn't. Eventually we laughed it off, called it the Ridge Carpenter, and went to bed. I fell asleep quickly, half comforted by the sound of Cooper's breathing next to the tent. The next night, the sound came back. Same rhythm, same direction. Only this time, it was closer, maybe a few hundred meters up the slope. I remember waking up to Cooper whining softly. The fire had burned out, and the temperature had dropped below freezing. The noise wasn't hammering anymore, more like someone dragging metal over rock. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Nate sat up too. We listened for maybe 10 minutes, not talking. I checked my watch, 12:43 a.m. It's strange the details you remember. Every few seconds, the sound paused, then continued again, steady as breathing. I tried to record it on my phone, but when I played it back the next morning, there was nothing but wind. We climbed partway up the ridge later that morning to see if we could find anything. There wasn't much, just dry pine needles, some deer prints, and a patch of turned-up soil that looked recently disturbed. We found a piece of wood wedged under a rock, like a frame or trap, half buried. It looked newer than it should have, no weathering, no rot. Nate kicked it aside, said hunters or researchers probably left it. Still, neither of us said much on the way back down. That night, we didn't even start a fire. We just sat inside the tent with a lantern on low, listening. It was around the same time, a bit after midnight, when we heard something again. Not hammering this time. A short metallic clang, then silence. I don't think either of us breathed for a full minute. Cooper started whining again, then barked once. A sharp, panicked bark, before Nate grabbed his collar. That's when we both heard it. A faint scraping, maybe 30 meters away, followed by the sound of loose gravel shifting, like footsteps. Then nothing. We didn't stay a third night. The air felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, just heavy. Like the place wanted us gone. When the sun came up, we packed slowly. No silence, no rush. Just that tired mood people get after a long argument they never had. Halfway down the service road, we passed a pickup parked under the trees. Empty. The bonnet was still warm. Nate slowed down, looked at me, then kept driving. Neither of us said a word. A few weeks later, he sent me a link to a short local news piece. Some hikers had reported a makeshift site up near the same ridge. Broken snares, a few tools, and what the ranger described as evidence of recent digging. Nothing criminal, just strange. I wanted to ask him if he thought it was the same spot, but he didn't reply to the message I sent. He still won't talk about it. I told my brother about it later, and he said, "We were idiots for camping anywhere without phone reception." He's probably right. I still go camping, but I pick spots with other cars in view now. Nate never brings it up, and I don't push it. Some things just feel better left out there. This happened in late 2018, when I was still at NYU studying economics. My girlfriend, Ava, wasn't the outdoors type at all. She grew up in Manhattan, the kind of person who gets uncomfortable if she can't hear traffic outside her window. She liked expensive coffee, rooftop bars, and soft hotel beds. I was from a small town in upstate New York, used to cheap beer and long drives, so our worlds didn't always line up. We'd been dating for a year and things were good, but I remember feeling a bit of pressure to do more with her. She'd just finished midterms and was stressed out. I couldn't afford to take her somewhere nice. I was living off a student loan and a campus job tutoring undergrads in microeconomics. So when I suggested a camping trip, I sold it as a kind of digital detox. "It'll be romantic in a simple way," I said, probably sounding like an idiot. She laughed at me and said I sounded like a guy who read one self-help blog and thought he'd found enlightenment. She wasn't wrong. Still, she agreed to go, as long as I handled everything. We borrowed my roommate's old Subaru, which had a cracked windshield and smelled like wet socks, and left the city just after lunch on a Friday. Ava packed snacks. She always packed snacks, even for a walk to class, and I brought a tent I'd bought used off Facebook Marketplace. The drive took about 3 hours, and we ended up at a spot near the Catskills that a friend from my hometown had mentioned. It wasn't an official campsite, just a clearing off a back road where people sometimes park to fish or light a fire. We stopped for gas at a station about 20 minutes away, one of those old places that still had a mechanical sign. I remember the attendant telling me, half jokingly, "Watch for bears up there." Ava wasn't thrilled to hear that. She asked if there'd be toilets. I said yes, even though there wouldn't. We got to the clearing around 4 in the afternoon. It was quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but that strange emptiness you only get in places far from people. There were no other cars, just a small path down to a creek and a fire ring made from old stones. We set up the tent while it was still light. Ava handed me pegs like she was helping, but mostly just took photos for Instagram. She captioned one, "Off-grid vibes," which I thought was funny because she'd brought her curling iron in case the car had power, but got annoyed when couldn't post it because of no service. By the time the sun dropped behind the trees, the temperature had fallen too. We sat on a blanket eating pasta from a camp stove that sputtered every few seconds. Ava poured cheap red wine into metal mugs. It was kinda nice. I put on a playlist I'd made called Soft Dinner Party, which she teased me about for the rest of the night. Around midnight, when the fire had burned down to glowing coals, I started to get that uneasy feeling you get when everything is too still. Ava was scrolling through old photos on her phone and was probably ready to go to sleep. Then, somewhere down the road, we heard an engine. Headlights flickered through the trees. Quick flashes, then nothing. A car was pulling off the road, maybe 50 or 60 meters away. The sound stopped. The engine cut out. No voices, just quiet. Then we heard the sound of 2 doors being slammed close. Ava asked if it was a ranger, but I said probably not. Rangers didn't park in the dark with their lights off. She told me to relax, said it was probably someone else camping, but her voice was tight. I tried to believe that, but something about it felt wrong. The clearing wasn't big enough for 2 groups, and there was no reason to stop that close to us when there were turnouts all along the road. 5, maybe 10 minutes passed. Then we heard talking. Muffled at first, like people trying not to be heard. 2 voices, both male. Not laughing, not friendly. Just that low, annoyed tone you hear when people argue in public. A metallic scrape came next, dragging across dirt. Ava stiffened beside me. I switched off the lantern instinctively. We sat there, not moving. Then a flashlight beam swept through the trees, cutting across our tent for a second before sliding away. It stopped on the road, then moved again, slower this time. I remember the smell of the fire, the hiss of the last embers, and the sound of Ava's breathing next to me. The light came back, once more, brighter, stopping just short of the tent's fabric, like whoever held it was deciding whether to come closer. Then it moved off again. We heard more scraping, like metal hitting rock, and a short, heavy thud. It went quiet after that. The car engine started up about 10 minutes later, idled for a bit, then rolled away slowly, tires crunching on gravel. Neither of us said anything for a while. Eventually Ava whispered, "Let's leave." I wanted to, but I was too scared to unzip the tent. It felt like if I made any noise, they'd hear it and come back. So we sat there until the first light came through the trees. When we finally got out, everything looked normal. Except about 20 meters away, near the tree line, the ground was torn up, like someone had started digging and stopped halfway. There were fresh tire tracks leading right to it. No tools, no rubbish, just that shallow pit. Ava refused to stay another minute. We packed up in silence, threw everything into the Subaru, and got back onto the road without even eating breakfast. She kept glancing out the back window. I tried to make jokes to calm her down, but she wasn't having it. Back in town, I told my friend who'd recommended the spot what happened. He went quiet and said, "You probably shouldn't camp there anymore." When I asked why, he said there'd been weird stuff a few years ago. People going missing, dodgy local traffic, stuff like that. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. That night, I lay in bed in my apartment, listening to the city traffic outside and couldn't stop thinking about that half-dug hole. Maybe it was nothing, someone burying rubbish, maybe clearing a spot for a fire, but every time I replay it, I can still see that flashlight freezing on our tent, as if they knew exactly where we were. Ava hasn't gone camping since. She jokes about it sometimes when friends suggest road trips. Says she's retired from the outdoors, but I can tell she still thinks about that night. But hey, on the bright side, I've graduated NYU, and we're set to be married next year. I think about that night as well, though, especially when I'm driving at night and see a car parked on the side of a quiet road, lights off, engine running. I can't help but wonder what's waiting inside, or what might be buried nearby. I used to work long-haul delivery routes across Colorado and New Mexico, hauling anything from fencing wire to boxes of cheap tools. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me quiet time. I liked that part. Just me, the truck, the road, and static on the AM radio. Most nights I stayed in cheap motels, the kind with flickering neon signs and ice machines that never worked. But every now and then, if the weather was good, I'd camp instead. It saved a bit of money, and I liked waking up to silence instead of someone yelling through a paper-thin wall. That week I'd finished a drop in southern Colorado near Trinidad and decided to stay out one more night before heading home to Albuquerque. I remembered a clearing just off State Route 12, tucked behind a cluster of pines near a dried-up creek bed. I'd pulled over there once to eat lunch and figured it'd do fine for a quick camp. I parked the truck at around 6 in the evening, got a small fire going, and set up my old canvas tent beside the creek. It was late autumn, and the air had that cold, metallic bite that seeps into your clothes once the sun dips. The trees around me were mostly dead, and there was the constant buzzing of crickets or some sort of insect. Dinner was simple, canned chili and a beer. I sat by the fire, watching the last bit of daylight drain from the ridge. You don't realize how dark it gets in the mountains until you're out there with no phone signal and no other lights in sight. I remember thinking it felt good to be away from everything. Around 9:30, I noticed a small white light moving along the ridge about a quarter mile away. I figured it was another camper, or maybe a rancher checking fences. The beam moved side to side a few times, then stopped dead. A few minutes later it started again, lower this time, almost at ground level. After 10 minutes, it vanished. I told myself it was nothing and went back to my beer. I crashed around 11, but it took a while to sleep. I could still see that faint glow in my head. The next night, same thing, except this time, the light came back sooner. I was sitting by the fire again, halfway through a sandwich, when I caught the glow, drifting through the trees. Closer this time, too close to be someone just hiking by. I shut off my lantern and waited, letting my eyes adjust. The firelight flickered against the trees, and for a second, I thought I saw something move just beyond the glow. A shape, maybe, but I couldn't be sure. Then the light stopped completely. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. coming from down near the creek. Crunch, and then another crunch. Not an animal. Not that steady. Whoever it was knew I was there, but they weren't trying to sneak up either. I gripped the flashlight in my hand but didn't turn it on. My heart was hammering so loud I could feel it in my ears. After maybe a minute, the footsteps stopped. The fire crackled once, loud enough to make me flinch. Then I heard breathing. It was faint, steady, maybe 30 feet away. Someone just standing there watching. I waited, didn't move, didn't speak. The breathing went on for a while, then faded. A few seconds later, gravel shifted somewhere near the road, and a car door shut. By the time I got out of the tent, the only thing left was darkness. At first light, I looked around. There was one set of boot prints circling the fire pit, stopping about 10 feet from where I'd slept. They led back toward the creek, then disappeared into the brush. No tire tracks, no other sign anyone had been there. I packed up fast and hit the road. I figured I'd stop in town for breakfast and shake it off. When I got to Trinidad, I stopped at a small diner just off Main Street, the kind with a jukebox that hasn't worked since the 80s. The waitress asked if I was camping, said she could tell from the mud on my boots. When I told her roughly where I'd stayed, she frowned. "You were out by the old quarry, right?" she asked. I nodded. She looked uneasy. "You probably shouldn't camp out there anymore," she said. "A hunter went missing out that way last winter. They found his truck near the same ridge you're talking about. Door still open, keys in the ignition." I waited for her to keep talking, but she didn't. She just gave this half shrug, like it wasn't the first time she'd had to warn someone. I paid, left the diner, and started the drive south. The sky was starting to turn that washed-out gray before sunrise. Empty roads, empty fields. Every few miles, I kept catching myself glancing in the mirrors, not expecting to see anything, but not wanting to be surprised either. A few hours in, I stopped on a turnout to stretch. The air was cold and thin, nothing around but open land and the outline of the mountains behind me. I stood there a minute, listening. No wind, no birds, nothing. Then I heard it, just once, a slow crunch of gravel somewhere behind the truck. I spun around, but there was no one there, no tracks, no light, nothing. I got back in, locked the doors, and didn't stop again until Albuquerque. That was years ago. I've driven thousands of miles since, and every so often, when I pull over on a quiet road and kill the engine, I still catch it. That same sound. One step, slow, deliberate, somewhere just behind me, and I don't look anymore.